We are studying the first verse of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Sri Aurobindo's commentary begins by placing this Upanishad as the most obscure and the profoundest of the Upanishads. And therefore, in our reading of it and our study, we must be careful not to stop short in our understanding, but go as deep as possible to draw out layers and layers. In the commentary, Sri Aurobindo offers us the etymological basis for keywords Ashva and Usha. The first line, Ushava Ashvasya Medhyasya Shirah, dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial, then translates to mean that Ashva, being, existence, substance, and by extension therefore of force, strength, solidity, speed, enjoyment, pervading, constituting the world, is this tremendous power which is surging into manifestation. And as this Ashva, the power, moves into manifestation, the front, the head of the horse, Ashva, the head is dawn, Usha, which he explains means etymologically coming into manifest being, and by extension therefore desire or yearning. And so we see this huge force moving into manifestation, and the front, the head, is the yearning to manifest as it moves into manifestation. And Sri Aurobindo says at that point, it is on the brink. It is on the brink of satisfaction. It's not a vague yearning in the depth, but the yearning has come on the brink of form, and now it is about to take form. And the very next line describes how that formation takes place. When it says, the sun is his eye, his breath is the wind, his wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. Suryash chakshur vata prano vyattam agnir vaishvanarah. And then it speaks of time as the self. But these three, the sun, the wind, and the fire, are identified with three parts, all of them in the head. So they are as if a part of the head, the Usha, the front movement into manifestation, and there are three components within that movement of manifestation as it is on the brink of taking form. And these three components or these three powers are the means by which the form emerges out of formlessness. The means by which this yearning or desire to manifest is fulfilled in material, concrete, sustaining, permanent form. And these three we had already looked at briefly in a kind of a survey last time. After having dwelt on the sense of the sun, we saw how the wind and the fire follow. So this time we will summarize what the sun represents and then elaborate on the wind and fire. The sun, we saw last time, is this creative seeing, the seeing by which the divine manifests himself. Before he can manifest, he must see what he is. And as he sees, the seeing draws what he sees, which is himself. The seeing draws himself into permanence of manifestation. The seeing itself is the movement of manifesting. So this is the sun. You will remember also the etymological sense of sun, Surya, spreading into being. So there is this spreading movement of the sight, but the seeing itself is the becoming and entering into manifestation, but it's only the first stage. From that seeing now, the next power must act, which is the life breath, described here as his breath is the wind. Vata prano. And then the third step, which makes the form permanent and concrete, is his wide open mouth is fire. So the three stages of materialization, which we had briefly touched upon last time, the seeing of what is to be created, infusing into it life force, to give it energy, to give it density, to give it power of manifestation, action, and finally the densifying into form until it acquires materiality. And this comes in the action of fire. But now, having seen what he must become, the second step is what we focus on. His breath is the wind. Vata prano. We are familiar with the term prana, also vata, but we'll elaborate on each of these. But just to understand in the process, if we were simply to see the process of materialization, having seen when you infuse energy, what is the energy itself? If an individual were to materialize, and we discussed this briefly last time, the seeing comes from your sight, from your mind, from your mind's eye, which in the mental world already gives it the idea form. When you must now infuse it with energy, the energy itself comes from your own life energy. Your own prana becomes now the energy that fills this idea form, and it infuses into it not only dynamism but also movement, without which nothing can be manifested. In fact, when movement lapses, you fall into an unmanifest condition, and it is movement which defines the appearance of form. And then the movement itself must acquire a character of specific repeated formation which comes with the fire principle. But that life force is coming out of oneself. And even one can say, on its most material level, it takes the substance of your own subtle physical body to densify and concretize into materialization. But a similar process is taking place from the one source of creation, the divine himself. As he sees himself, he dynamizes himself as the energy of prana, and then he materializes himself out of his own substance. So having with this background and the relationship of the three, we look at a few elaborations and comments of Sri Aurobindo, particularly in relation to prana. The first I take from a text we have already studied in Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Isha Upanishad, where you will remember the passage, Tasmin apo matarishva dadhati. In that the master of life establishes the waters. And in his commentary on that line, Sri Aurobindo says, Brahman in matter, or physical being, represents itself as the universal life power, Matarishvan, which moves there as a dynamic energy, prana, and presides effectively over all arrangement and formation. He then goes on to describe other things. But you see the role of prana, the energy as it enters the material density is prana, but it presides effectively over all arrangement and formation. That is, it makes effective and presides over the arrangement and formation which the fire principle is going to finally complete. But life force has to preside over by providing the dynamic energy itself. So this is the first text. The second text comes from another commentary of his on the Isha Upanishad, which we have not studied here, which was part of a series of drafts and is available in the larger volume of the Isha Upanishad articles. I believe they were not published earlier, but here he speaks of the same function of energy and life force. But what is this energy? This is from page 526 of the Isha Upanishad volume. But what is this energy? It is, says the Vedanta, prana, matarishvan, life force or vital energy, that which organizes itself in man as nervous energy and creates and carries on the processes and activities of life in material form. So we know it in our subjective experience as the nervous life force, vitality within us. But he has given already 4 words: prana, matarishvan, life force or vital energy. And he will elaborate. We find the same nervous and vital energy present also in the animal, the plant. It exists obscurely. It has been discovered even in the metal. This is from the experiments of Jagdish Chandra Bose, where he shows that the same life force with exactly the same life process exists in metal fatigue as in muscular fatigue, exists in crystalline growth as in tissue growth, and exactly the same pattern, the same process, effectively the same life force. He continues, we have therefore in the world we inhabit a unity of life energy in its actions, as well as a unity of matter in its formal changes. For modern thinking, the problem is complicated by the narrow restriction of the idea of life first, popularly to the material vessels of a conscious nervous activity, man, the animal, the insect, and then more widely to all forms of which organic growth and nervous response are the characteristic activities. So he says life is not just that, not just what is organized in the form. Vedantic thought sees, on the contrary, that all energy apparent in matter is one life energy. Nervous force, electric force, even mental force, so far as it works in matter, are different forms of one working, which it calls prana shakti, energy of life, formulated force of existence throwing itself out in the currents and knotting itself into the vessels of its self-adaptive material workings. So here's the description of this life force and what exactly it does. And you'll see it fits perfectly in what we are studying from the description of the cosmic horse. Here is this surging force of manifestation, becoming on the brink, and then having seen the form that it wants to cast itself. What does it do? Prana Shakti, energy of life, formulated force of existence. It is existence, but force of existence, formulating itself, throwing itself out in the currents, and knotting itself into the vessels of its self-adaptive material workings. So there is this throwing out, but the movement to throw out also enters this whirling motion of energy, by which it creates these stable focal points of energy, not yet of form stable, but stable energetic whirls. And they are vessels now. Vessels of its self-adaptive material workings. That is, it leads what it wants to become. It adapts itself to whatever it wants to manifest. It carries within it its own means of fulfillment, the form it wants to take, the way it wants to express itself, the way it wants to respond. All that is held already within it. It needs nothing outside. It manifests itself in this way. Now, if you look at an animal, for example, observe its reactions, and in your mind's eye, erase the specifics of the form. What are you left with? a bundle of energy which is in constant action and reaction in interchange with the world. You observe the deer or the tiger, and you see two different vessels of pure energy. One which is expressing this springy, light, leaping motion. It reaches out as it nibbles leaves, it will draw in rapid movements. On the other hand, you have the tiger, which does not have this rapid, springy motion. It has a slow movement and then a sudden burst and grasping, tearing, forcefully. What you see in essence, the distinction between the two is the way the bundle of energy expresses itself. The form is irrelevant actually. The form is only the outermost sheath by which the eyes can see the energy bundle and its activity. But if you remove that skin, paint them all the same way, put a mask to distinguish so that you do not distinguish the form shape, what you have in essence is the behavior of the energy and its reactions. And it is this throwing itself out on the currents, in the currents, and knotting itself into the vessels of its self-adaptive material workings. Life as we know it is the characteristic fulfillment of this stream of being. That is the form, the character of its specific behavior. According to the Vedantic idea, the characteristic form of any energy is to be recognized by us not in its lowest, but in its highest expression. And so he moves, but we skip that. And in the conversations that Pavitrada had with Sri Aurobindo, which are noted in the little book Evening Talks, which are in the little book titled Conversations with Sri Aurobindo, there is a description of the 5 elemental conditions. Sri Aurobindo is describing in the other sequence from fire, then air, and then the ether. Of the fire, he speaks of 3 fires, and we will come back to this. Or maybe we should look at the 3 now in sequence. So according to the experience of the ancient yogis, Sri Aurobindo says, sensible matter was made out of 5 elements. Bhutani, Prithvi, Apas, Agni or Tejas, Vayu, Akasha. We are familiar with these terms. Now he describes the 3 from fire onwards. Agni is threefold. First, ordinary fire, Jada Agni. Second, electric fire, Vaidyut Agni. Third, solar fire, Saurya Agni. I will come back to all 3 in elaboration when we come to the mouth of the horse. Science has only entered upon the first and second of these fires. The fact that the atom is like the solar system could lead it to the knowledge of the third. And this is in 1929, Sri Aurobindo says. It is subsequently that we discovered the subatomic interactions and the secret of the atomic energy. But he goes on. Beyond Agni is Vayu, and this is our immediate interest. Beyond Agni is Vayu, of which science knows nothing. It is the support of all contact and exchange, the cause of gravitation and of the magnetic and electric fields. Through it, the action of Agni, the formal element, the builder of forms, is made possible. So until Vayu comes into effect, the action of Agni is not made possible. What is Agni's role? Agni is the formal element, builder of forms. But Agni can only function through Vayu. Therefore, in the description of the cosmic horse in the Upanishad, first there is the seeing, then the Vayu, which prepares the possibility for Agni then to concretize the form. So this Vayu principle is the principle of all contact and exchange, the cause of gravitation and the magnetic and electric fields. Now this is quite an extraordinary statement because it links with a very material domain of science which otherwise we would not fully appreciate. In fact, when we look at modern science and it's dealing with gravitation, magnetic and electric fields, we find truly science knows nothing. When Sri Aurobindo says, beyond Agni is Vayu of which science knows nothing, if you look at all the books of physics, you will find them describing gravitation, magnetic and electric fields, describing, explaining nothing. Equations describing the behavior of all three, but explaining nothing. Why we all say, oh, gravitation, it's obvious, Earth pulls. Why? We don't know. All matter pulls, but that doesn't explain. It is just a statement of observation. Why does matter pull? We don't know. Einstein came and tried to bypass the problem by saying space is curved and matter doesn't pull, and so as things move, they curve in space and so fall or move around. They are deflected. Gravitation, therefore, for him is curvature of space. But the question would be asked, why is space curved at that location where matter exists? And there's no answer. He might say, matter itself doesn't exist, there is only curvature of space. But what provoked the curvature in that manner, in that form, in that location? No answer. There is a something which is causing this effect that we call gravitation. But gravitation is only a phenomenon, we do not know what causes it. And it is exactly the same with magnetic and electric fields. What is a magnet? How does it work? We say it is made up of smaller molecular magnets. Molecular magnets themselves are made up of smaller atomic magnets. Each atom is a magnet. Why is an atom a magnet? We do not know. What is a magnetic force? We do not know. Why does it behave this way? We do not know. And the same for electric fields. Even when we speak of an electron or a proton, we see its field reaching out, rippling out, interacting with other fields. But what is the field itself? We do not know. Where does it come from? We do not know. What provokes it to emerge from the electron, gives it this strength or this quality or property? We do not know anything. In fact, we do not even know the electron exists. We only know the field and its behavior, and we posit that there's an electron from which the field emerges. We do not know anything. So when Sri Aurobindo makes this very dramatic statement, of which science knows nothing, he is absolutely right and he is not exaggerating. Then I skip a few things where he's describing the elements. Someone asks, Pavitrada asks, did science study the first three tattvas? Because Sri Aurobindo skipped the first. What, for instance, is apas? That is the water principle. Sri Aurobindo says, it is the element that makes life possible, the desire which is the source of life. Agni is the element which renders form possible. And Prithvi is the compacting element which concretizes. And then again somebody makes a comment, corresponding Vayu with gas. But he says that's not true. Vayu, Sri Aurobindo's comment, Vayu has been identified with gas, but that is a mistake. It is Vayu which permits exchanges and mutual actions. Gravitation, for example, it is an element of contact. So, the Vayu is also the element from beyond the Vayu is the ether, Akasha, in which we have the character of vibration. And there's again a comment of how sound is representative of that, and the hearing, all vibration is emerging as a creative vibration in the origin. Vayu then is a movement of energy. Fire then concretizes form. I think we just keep this as a background. And we read now a greater elaboration, which is part of Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Isha Upanishad, published in the Karma Yogin. And from the larger volume of the Isha Upanishad, it is on page 250. There he describes all 5 elements in sequence in great detail. I will not go into that, but simply focus on prana and vayu. About ether he says, the next matter condition evolved. Okay, first ether, he says, is this original state of subtle matter, and then from there vayu. The next material condition evolved from ether, and moving in it was the pure aerial or gaseous. Here to pervasiveness was added a new potency of sensible and varied motion. Ether has only this pervading character. Vayu has motion, which is sensible. Bringing with it, as increased complexity of motion necessarily must do, increased differentiation and complexity of substance. All the variety and evolution of gaseous matter from their peculiar activities, functions and combinations have this second state or power of matter as their substratum. It is the basis also of that universal prana or vital energy, starting from action, retention and reaction and culminating in organized consciousness, which we have seen to be so all important an agent in the Vedic theory of the cosmos. So now we have come to this universal prana, and it's critical to observe this usage, universal prana, because later we will see how it is also universal fire, which is referred to in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. What is the function of this? Vital energy starting from action, retention and reaction and culminating in organized consciousness. All of these are functions of this life force. He says, in this second power of matter, a new property of material substance is evolved, touch or contact, which was not fully developed in pure ether owing to its extreme tenuity and primary simplicity of substance. Now, when there's an ether wind, you do not obviously have contact, but when there's a life force movement, you have the experience of contact. In fact, to extend it to the physical description, because he says gravitation, electromagnetism and electric fields are functions of the life energy, we see how the movement of life energy leads to precisely this forceful movement of gravitation, magnetism and electrical field. Seeking for a physical substance, gaseous in nature, sensible by sound and contact, but without form, and characterized chiefly by varied motion and an imperfect pervasiveness, the rishis found it in Vayu, wind or air. Vayu, therefore, is the conventional term for the second condition of matter. So straight away we see the name Vayu, which is also the name for wind, is given because of the similarity. It is not wind, the physical wind we are speaking of, but this particular power of life energy. And then from there comes the fire principle. And in the Upanishad we see this sequence. So we read of that next. Evolved out of the pure gaseous state and moving in it is the third or pure igneous condition of matter, which is also called Teja, light and heat energy. In the igneous stage, pervasiveness becomes less subtle, sensible motion no longer the paramount characteristic, but energy, especially formative energy, attaining full development and creation and destruction. Formation and new formation are at last in readiness. So what we are seeing here in the transition across the five elements, in a sense each is in each. But as we move through the five gradations, the characteristics of the first recede, the characteristic of the second become less, but the characteristic of the third now is emphasized, which was there in the first two but very vaguely, and now that is emphasized. It's as if there is a single creative movement taking this fivefold status, emphasizing these five different gradations or qualities which are called elemental qualities, or as we say generally, five elements. But each is in each, in a way. And we will see when we come back to the description of the horse, these three particularly are described in this way. So with the fire principle we have formative energy, full development and creation and destruction, formation and new formation. So in addition to sound and contact, matter has now evolved a third property, form. which could not have developed in pure air owing to its insufficient density and the elusive vagueness and volatility of gaseous manifestations. The third power of matter is at the basis of all phenomena of light and heat. And prana, by its aid, so develops that birth and growth now becomes possible. So prana, life energy, which we have seen in the second stage, uses the means of fire to develop birth and growth in stable form. The rest is also, it's fascinating, but we won't go into that further. He simply says here that light and heat are necessary conditions of any animate life forms and their development. And when the light and heat departs from a man, then it is prana, the vital energy, which departs. And the subtle body is as if, and the physical body is dropped, and the consciousness retires into the mental and subtle body. So we do not go further in this text. If you are interested, you can read those for elaboration. We can now come back to the text as we have been reading it. The sun is the eye of this great force. The wind is its life breath or vital energy. Fire is its open mouth. And Sri Aurobindo says, we are here in the company of very familiar symbols. We shall have to return to them hereafter. But they are, in their surface application, obvious and lucid. Unfortunately, in the commentary as it survives, he does not return to them, and that's why we have been looking at his other elaborations of all three. And I come now finally to one more text where you will see the fire aspect elaborated. This is from an article titled The First Rik of the Rigveda. And here Sri Aurobindo explains the etymological basis of each word and even each syllable of the first Rik of the Rigveda. And it is a fascinating text, one of the most profound and multifaceted. And you understand why the Veda was said to have all knowledge. So in that, he is taking the word Agni. The verse itself begins with Agnim ire purohitam. So what is Agni? And he goes into the etymology of the word itself. But before that, he explains who or what is Agni and what is this power, why is it a god, and so on. So as part of that larger discussion, there is a fascinating passage which I will just partially read. He says, Agni, in the sphere of material energies, is the master of Tejas, the third and central material principle in the 5 known to Vedic science. Tejas itself is of 7 kinds, and it describes each of these, and I skip them. Each of the 7 has its own appropriate energy. For the energy is the essential reality, and the light only a characteristic accompaniment of the energy. Of these, Agni is the greatest in the world, greater even than Vidyut, and he explains why and so on. The main point, though, he comes to is the formative power. Agni, therefore, is master of Tejas, especially fiery Tejas. In the language of modern psychology, this Sahaituka tapas is will in action, not desire, but will embracing desire and exceeding it. It is not even choice, wish, or intention. Will in the Vedic idea is essentially knowledge taking the form of force. Agni, therefore, is purely mental force necessary to all concentration. And this is, of course, in the context of the verse. But you see how the emergence of Agni is natural and automatically consequent to the emergence of the prana, which is itself consequent to the Surya, the seeing sight and vision. And then he gives the etymological root of Agni. The word Agni is formed from the root Ag with the nominal addition Ni. The root Ag is itself a derivative root of the primitive meaning to be, of which traces are found in many languages. The G gives an idea of force, and Ag therefore means to exist in force preeminently, to be splendid, strong, excellent. And Agni means mighty, supreme, splendid, forceful, bright. Now again, when you look at the etymology of Agni, you see the meaning to be, the G meaning force, and you see what we have been reading so far. Ashva, which is that being, and the front is Usha, who is on the brink of manifesting, and then there is the seeing by the sun, and then the force of Vayu, and then Agni. And you see the and G are already seen in the sequence. When we look at these texts from this sort of perspective, you see how everything blends into each other. You see a single movement with many multifaceted threads, and they just unfold in a particular sequence. You could reduce it in mental terms and say this, and then that, and then that, and then that. Or you could stand back, and as we are supposed to dwell on it intuitively, we see this single movement of an experience with fine, subtle threads merging, emerging, and in sequence unfolding. And the whole thing has such an extraordinary beauty when we experience it in this way. He elaborates on the Ag and the way it forms in various languages, but we can skip that. So these were some related texts which give us the deeper sense of this description. The sun is his eye, his breath is the wind, his wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. Now we go to the Sanskrit. Suryash Chakshu. Surya, that spreading movement of sight. Chakshu, eye. But it doesn't say two eyes, it says just eye. Sri Aurobindo translates literally, the sun is his eye. He doesn't say eyes. So there is a one-pointed seeing. This horse is as if having a single sight, a single vision. It's obviously not a description of the biological horse with two eyes. So even in the human being, although we have two physical eyes, our sight is one. When we look at an object, it is a one seeing. We do not experience two different seeings which get merged. So the sight is what is being described, not so much the biology. So, Suryash Chakshu, Vata Prano. Now the life force is Vata, the breath of the horse. And here we will draw on the description we read. At a cosmic level, there is this vast, universal life breath pouring. But since the Upanishad itself uses the symbol of a horse, we will now see how that functions in the individual form. In the horse, as in the human, we see the breath as the first material base for life force. We can close our eyes. Life is not affected. We can close the mouth and even stop eating or drinking. Life is not obviously affected. Eventually it is affected. But if you stop the breathing, very quickly you find the life processes declining. In fact, even instantaneously the declining starts. The reflex in the body is so deep-rooted. If you observe a little baby, take a little bit of water, cold water, and sprinkle on his face. Immediately there is a reflex. And what is reflex after all but a habit of life energy? Immediately there is a reflex. The baby closes eyes, holds breath, closes mouth. and stops all movement. And at that point, you can even put the baby in water and he will not drown. He may even open his eyes but will continue to hold his breath. This is how they teach babies to swim even underwater. And this is a reflex which survives the first 1 year. After that, it gradually begins to fade, especially when mind comes forward. But what you're seeing here is pure life force reflex to conserve. The air which is inside, it conserves and extends and uses it up as long as possible. The moment you stop the breathing, life force already begins to conserve itself and begins to reduce its activities. So breath is the most obvious and most prominent function and basis of life energy working in us. The yogic knowledge describes 5 air currents within the human being. Vata, Panchavayu, we say. And these 5 currents, Sri Aurobindo has explained in a way which is slightly different from the way it is normally translated in English. There is the prana, which is the upper movement of air, where we take in life force in our breathing, especially resting all the way to the base of the lungs. Apana is the life force which throws out exhausted, used up, waste, energy or material, and begins from the transition point where we have the diaphragm and below, including the whole digestive process and the intestines and the organs for throwing out. Samana is the balancing principle which balances the intake and the outgo, but also establishes a rhythm of harmony. Because in any life process, in a limited function of a part or a piece, an object or a life being, it has to take life from the universe. It has to pour back into the universe. Because the principle is this: nothing can exist in separation and isolation, because all is an expression of oneness. So any life force bundle can retain itself and remain as a living bundle only if it continues interchange with the all. And therefore there is no life process which can remain in isolation for too long. It must continue taking in and throwing out. But as the life bundle grows, it must take in more than it throws out. If the life bundle chooses to shrink, it must throw out more than it takes in. If it wants to stay static, it must balance the two. Now what happens? The sustenance of the life energy is by the balance of these two. And that itself is a special action of life energy, to keep the balance. Do I take in more? Do I take in less than what I eject? Is a function of a life energy presiding over this dual movement of taking in and throwing out. That function, when it increases, the life form grows. When that function weakens, the life form weakens. And it is as if a special action of life energy in itself, a flow of air, vayu, of the 5. The third is udana, which is an energetic exchange between levels of consciousness. From the material body through the subtle body, there is we can even say infinite fine gradations, although we may have distinctions we make. Infinite continuity from the gross body through the subtle body into even the spiritual body. And there is a continuous exchange also of energy rising up and flowing down. And udana is this flow of life energy in us. When the upward movement is strong, then the whole consciousness turns up and rises into a higher state. When the upward movement is weak, we find ourselves unable to open to the higher regions. And in the final transition where the physical body is dropped, it is by this movement of the udana that the soul leaves the gross body, enters the subtle body, and even may withdraw further if necessary. The 5th vayu is this function of extending consciousness, especially through the senses. The consciousness reaching out to relate to the world through the whole organism and drawing in also the inflow of sensory contact. But especially it is this movement of reaching out. It is by this that the individual consciousness connects through the form of the body with the universe, and it is this which presides over also the senses particularly. But otherwise, generally, it is this extension up to the extremities. When this energy is weak, you will find the extremities lose sensation. As for example, when a person is very weak and there is not enough sugar or insufficient blood flow, normally it is the extremities which become cold and which become numb, and the life force gradually centers itself in the critical areas where it must protect life. On the other hand, when we are full of energy, vitality, and enthusiastically turning to meet the world, there is the surge of energy going out all the way to the tips. The tips become warm, the flow of blood increases, etc. In trance, when we withdraw from the external senses and turn in, and perhaps even withdraw from the inner senses and go into a cataleptic trance, at that point you will find the same phenomenon. The extremities of the body become cool, blood flow slows down, and even at the center, the heart rate and breathing slows down. So it is this fifth vyana which presides over this movement. This is this particular organization in individual forms of the same life force which is moving all over the universe. So for the horse, vata prano, that is his breath, is prana. The third now, having infused the vision with the life energy, the third step to give materialization of form is this wide open mouth, which is fire. And the text says, Vyat Vyatam Agnir Vaishvanara. So Vyatam is this open mouth, Agni is the fire, Vaishvanara is the universal fire. We will now dwell on each of these three words. Agni we have already seen, A and G, Ag and Ni, and there itself A and G. The whole movement of moving into the whole thread of movement into manifestation and the giver of form. But Vyatam in Sanskrit is opened, especially relating to mouth, but opened in the sense of expansion, vastness, specifically opening of the jaw and mouth in the way the term is used. But you see behind it, the sense is of this opening, widening, expanding into vastness. So the horse, when its mouth is opened, Vyatam, Vyada is opening, Vyatam is already opened. If the horse had not opened its mouth, the universal fire would not have come into action to give form. So the description of the cosmic horse is not the movement as it gradually unfolds to enter manifestation. It is the one who is surging and flowing into manifestation all the time. He has already taken manifestation, and the description of the horse is of the stages through which he flows into manifestation. So the mouth is already opened, Vyatam, but the sense of this opened mouth is the expansion into vastness. And then the third word concretizes this idea, Vaishvanaraha. Vishva, universal, Vaishvanara is the universal fire. It is one of the various fires which are described. In the Bhagavad Gita, there is this verse where Sri Krishna says, I have become Vaishvanara and have taken my station in each individual being. Vaishvanaro Bhutva, having become Vaishvanara, the fire universal. This is often understood to represent the fire in us, most concretely experienced as the fire of hunger, Jada Agni, which Sri Aurobindo referred to. But fire is not just that, it is the triple fire which we had read in our description. Sri Aurobindo spoke of Jada Agni, Vaidyut Agni, and Saurya Agni. In the Vedic descriptions of fire, we find always this description of triple fire. Jada, meaning dense, representing inertia, is the form of the fire's working most easily seen in material processes. Wherever there is heat and light, you can say it is fire which is working. In the most dense matter, heat and light we recognize in chemical processes in the densest form. So, in the stomach, where the digestion takes place, as the digestion proceeds, there is this heating up. The body's heat increasing is all part of the Jada Agni. But Vidyut Agni is more subtle. You do not see it so obviously in material form. When you see electricity sparking, enlightening, or creating heat, not obviously through chemical consumption, but pure heat without burning anything. So this is a more material expression of Vidyut Agni. Saurya Agni, the solar fire, is most significant in the text we are reading, because it started with the sun is his eye, breath is the wind, and open mouth is fire. So this is from this highest action of fire where you have the creation of form directly from the mental idea. In the way we observe it in matter, it is the thing which gives form stability at a subatomic level. If you look at processes of subatomic unification and breaking up of particles, the thing which holds the particles together, gives them a stable form, and is also the source of heat and light at a subatomic level. And you see here the atom bomb as one of the most obvious crude expressions of this energy. But what is taking place in the sun, we are taught, is also this subatomic interaction by which the sun is lit up. And therefore it is called the Saurya Agni in the material sense of the sun. But if you observe that subatomic interaction and ask, what is it that binds those particles together? What is it that gives them concreteness of form and is the source of their heat and light? We do not know in terms of pure physics. But as we approach it more and more, we find it is not so much a matter or a material process, but as if a principle, even an idea. There's a very famous statement by a physicist, I believe it is Oppenheimer, I'm not sure, who says that earlier it seemed as if the world was one giant machine. But increasingly, as we enter the domain of subatomic particles, it looks as if the world is one giant idea. Because we see there an ephemerality of substance or stability of form. Rather, there's something which is a pure idea that uses unstable agitations of particles to hold the form and give it stable appearance. And this is Agni working, directly translating that idea and the energy infused into the idea into appearance of stable form. So we can even say in this description of the Agni, his wide open mouth is fire. There are three gradations of the Agni process. From the Saurya Agni, which literally captures the idea of the form, down to the Vidyut Agni, which gives electrical phenomena, joining atoms, not subatomic, but joining atoms to create molecules, and the Jada Agni, where the molecules themselves are modified, often seen in the form of chemical heat and reactions. So it takes a transition, the fire itself takes a transition from that highest Saurya to the most dense Jada, but it is still the same universal master might. Sri Aurobindo translates Vaishvanara as master might universal. And in the footnote, Sri Aurobindo writes, because the sun is the master of sight, air is the basis of life, fire of strength and expansion. So we see here this triple process by which the movement of the one force to manifest takes on concrete, stable form. So you see the fullness of the text now. Om, dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial, the sun is his eye, his breath is the wind, his wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. And it is a whole universal expanse of energy which is being turned into a universal movement of formation. And at that point, we have the line completing with Samvatsara Atmascha Medhyasya. Medhyasya of the sacrificial horse. Samvatsara, the seasonal movement of time, is Atma, the self, the soul. And Sri Aurobindo translates as, time is the self of the horse sacrificial. And of this we will see later. But briefly to say, time not in its essential sense, but time as an unfolding seasonal rhythmic movement is what is the essence, the self of the sacrificial horse, which is the whole cosmos, is the divine moving into manifestation as the cosmos. So we can meditate on this. Om Ushava Ashvasya Medhyasya Shirah Suryash Chakshur Vata Prano Vyatam Agnir Vaishvanarah Samvatsara Atmashchasya Medhyasya. Om, dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial, the sun is his eye, his breath is the wind, his wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. Time is the self of the horse sacrificial.